In the fall of 2019, America was shocked by a criminal case that surprised even experienced detectives. At its center was Chad Daybell, an ordinary man from the provincial town of Rexburg, Idaho. Born on August 11, 1968, he grew up in a traditional Mormon family and for a long time lived a life that everyone around considered exemplary. Chad received his education at Brigham Young University, a prestigious institution closely connected with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It was there that he developed his literary abilities, which later became the foundation of his professional activity. For many years, Daybell worked as an editor and publisher at a small publishing house, Spring Creek Book Company, which primarily published religious literature for the Mormon community. Over time, Chad himself took up the pen. His works had a rather specific theme: apocalyptic novels that described the end of the world through the lens of Mormon teachings. A series of books called Standing in Holy Places, which included works such as The Great Gathering, The Celestial City, and The Rise of Zion, found its admirers among people who shared his religious views. No one then could have predicted that these books would become a chilling reflection of their author's future extremist beliefs. In 1990, Chad married Tammy Douglas. The couple raised 5 children and settled in Salem, a small town in Fremont County, Idaho. From the outside, their family seemed exemplary. Chad was actively involved in the local Mormon community, where he even held the position of bishop. Tammy worked as a school librarian, loved by both colleagues and students. She also helped her husband in publishing matters, editing texts, and resolving organizational issues. In 2018, Chad's life took a sharp turn when he met Lori Vallow at a Preparing a People conference in St. George, Utah. This meeting proved fateful for both. Lori was an attractive woman from Arizona, married to Charles Vallow. She had 2 children, 16-year-old daughter Tylee Ryan from a previous marriage and 7-year-old son Joshua, J.J. Vallow, whom she and her husband had adopted. At the conference, Chad and Lori immediately found common ground. They were united by a fascination with apocalyptic prophecies and non-traditional religious teachings. Despite both being married, romantic feelings quickly flared between them. They began actively communicating by phone and email, exchanging thoughts about the end of the world, spiritual abilities, and the special mission that, as it seemed to them, they had to fulfill together. This meeting and subsequent relationship set off a tragic chain of events. Chad's beliefs regarding the apocalypse and supernatural phenomena gradually became more radical, especially after getting to know Lori, who not only shared but also amplified these ideas. Together they created their own belief system, around which a small group of followers gathered. Many later characterized this association as a cult. Chad's life, which previously seemed almost flawless, began to take on dark shades. He became more withdrawn, mysterious, spending much time on the phone talking with Lori. Tammy noticed changes in her husband's behavior and shared her concerns with family and friends. According to those close to her, she felt that something was wrong with their marriage, although she couldn't exactly determine what the problem was. In October 2018, less than a year after meeting Chad, Lori and her children moved from Arizona to the town of Rexburg in Idaho, settling just a few miles from the Daybell's home. She explained this move as a desire to be closer to the college where her daughter Tylee was studying. However, as the investigation later established, the real reason was her desire to be near Chad. Please subscribe to my channel, and I will bring you more videos featuring the most shocking true crime stories. Meanwhile, Lori's own personal life was also filled with dramatic events. In July 2019, her 4th husband, Charles Vallow, was shot by Lori's brother, Alex Cox. He claimed that he acted in self-defense. This death raised suspicions but at that time did not lead to a serious investigation against Lori or her brother. After meeting Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell's religious views underwent radical changes. An ordinary interest in apocalyptic scenarios within Mormon teaching transformed into a dangerous obsession that led to the creation of a kind of cult. Even before meeting Lori, Daybell claimed to have experienced clinical death in his youth. According to him, during this experience, he received a divine revelation and a special gift to see the spiritual world. This episode became the foundation for his role as a self-proclaimed prophet. From 2015, Daybell began actively spreading theories about the end of the world at conferences and in podcasts. He particularly emphasized the idea of 144,000 chosen ones from the Book of Revelation, claiming that he had a mission to gather these people who would survive the apocalypse. At the Preparing a People conference, he met Lori Vallow, who had her own extremist views. She considered herself a spiritual warrior and a reincarnation of an ancient goddess, called to fight against dark forces. Together, they created a dangerous belief system that combined elements of Mormon theology with their own radical ideas. According to investigative materials, they believed they were married in past lives and had a special mission to help Jesus prepare for the second coming, which was supposed to happen on July 22, 2020. One of the most disturbing concepts of the couple became the theory about light and dark spirits, as well as about zombies. According to their beliefs, some people were possessed by dark spirits, turning into the living dead. They claimed they could identify such individuals by changes in eye color and energy. The most dangerous aspect of this theory was the belief that to free such a person's soul, it was necessary to destroy their body. In private correspondence, which later became evidence in the case, Chad and Lori discussed people from their circle whom they considered zombies. Among them were Lori's children, Tylee and JJ, as well as Chad's first wife, Tammy. In one letter, sent in October 2019, Chad wrote about Tylee, "I received confirmation that she has a spirit named Violetta, and she has been resisting for a long time." A small circle of followers formed around the couple, mainly members of the Mormon Church who were seeking deeper spiritual knowledge. Lori's brother, Alex Cox, played a special role, becoming the guardian and executor of their will. As the investigation established, it was he who not only shot Lori's husband, Charles Vallow, but was also involved in the murders of Tylee, JJ, and possibly Tammy Daybell. There was also a financial motivation in the formation of the couple's beliefs. After Charles Vallow's death, Lori received a significant insurance payout. Similarly, Daybell became the beneficiary of Tammy's insurance policy worth $430,000. Gradually, their beliefs became increasingly paranoid. They believed that the world was filled with zombies who wanted to hinder their mission. In September 2019, Lori told friends that her children had become zombies, and the only way to save their souls was to free them from their physical bodies. This concerned some people in her circle, but no one took decisive action to protect the children. By the end of 2019, the couple's apocalyptic fantasies had reached their peak. They were convinced that the end of the world was near, and they needed to accelerate their sacred mission. It was then that they moved from theories to terrible actions that led to the deaths of innocent people. Thus, ordinary religious views transformed into a dangerous ideology that justified horrible crimes. Distorted theology, paranoia, and a false sense of messianic purpose created a deadly combination that had tragic consequences for everyone who found themselves in the path of the self-proclaimed prophets of the end of the world. The fall of 2019 marked the beginning of horrifying events in the case of Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow. It was then that Lori's children disappeared without a trace, and soon after, Chad's first wife, Tammy Daybell, died under mysterious circumstances. These seemingly separate tragedies later turned out to be parts of a single criminal plan. 16-year-old Tylee Ryan, Lori's daughter, was a strong and independent girl. She moved to Idaho with her mother and brother in early September 2019. Tylee was last seen alive on September 8 in a park, where she was with her mother and uncle Alex Cox. Surveillance cameras recorded Alex taking her home that same day, after which the girl disappeared. Tylee's younger brother, 7-year-old Joshua, whom everyone called JJ, was a boy with autism. Despite his special needs, all who knew him described him as a cheerful and kind child. JJ was last seen on September 23, 2019, at school. The next day, Lori informed the school administration that she was transferring her son to homeschooling. No one has seen the boy since. When relatives and friends began asking about the children, Lori gave various contradictory explanations. To some, she said that Tylee was studying in another state, to others, that her daughter was visiting relatives. Regarding JJ, she claimed that she had sent him to friends in Arizona or to his grandmother. Melanie Gibb, a close friend of Lori, became an important witness in the case. In October 2019, when Melanie inquired about JJ's whereabouts, Lori lied that the boy was staying with Melanie herself in Arizona. This falsehood later became significant evidence against Vallow. Meanwhile, on October 19, 2019, when the children had already disappeared but the public was not yet alarmed, another tragedy occurred. Tammy Daybell, Chad's first wife, died in her own home. Initially, her death did not raise suspicions. Chad reported that he found his wife unconscious in the morning. Paramedics who arrived at the scene pronounced her dead, and considering Tammy's health problems and the absence of visible signs of violence, determined the cause of death as natural factors. However, there were details that raised concerns. 10 days before her death, Tammy told relatives that she had been attacked by an unknown masked person who tried to spray something in her face. The woman managed to fight back and escape, but she did not report it to the police, considering it merely hooliganism. Later, the investigation determined that this attack was part of Chad and Lori's plan. 2 weeks after Tammy's death, on November 5, 2019, Chad and Lori married in Hawaii. The ceremony took place on a beach, where the couple exchanged vows and expensive rings. Notably, there were no children at the wedding, neither Chad's 5 children nor Lori's children, whose fate was already unknown at that time. It was the hasty marriage, the disappearance of the children, and the suspicious circumstances of Tammy's death that attracted the attention of law enforcement. JJ's grandmother, Kay Woodcock, concerned that she had not been able to contact her grandson for several months, approached the Rexburg police on November 26, 2019, requesting them to check if the child was all right. When police officers arrived at Lori's residence, they found neither her nor the children. Neighbors reported that the couple had suddenly left a few weeks earlier without explaining why. As it turned out, Lori and Chad had moved to Hawaii, leaving most of their belongings behind. The disappearance of the children and the couple's sudden flight forced the police to begin a serious investigation. Law enforcement released photographs of the missing children and asked the public to help in the search. The FBI soon joined the case. The investigation took on a new dimension when investigators discovered a connection between the disappearance of the children, the death of Tammy Daybell, and the murder of Lori's former husband, Charles Vallow, in July 2019. All these events, which were previously considered separately, began to form a single horrifying picture. In December 2019, when the case attracted media and public attention, the police obtained permission to exhume Tammy's body. A repeated examination determined that the woman had not died from natural causes but from strangulation. While the investigation was ongoing, Chad and Lori lived in Hawaii, showing no concern for the fate of the missing children. They rented a house on the island of Kauai, went to the beach, and shopped. Lori wore a new wedding ring and used insurance payments received after her former husband's death. The couple's carefree life outraged the public. Particularly shocking was the fact that Lori was not worried about her missing children. When journalists in Hawaii asked her about the whereabouts of Tylee and JJ, she merely brushed them off. "Do I look like a mother who killed her children?" In January 2020, Idaho authorities set a deadline for Lori. She had to present the children within 5 days or face punishment. When the deadline passed and the children did not appear, on February 20, 2020, Lori was arrested in Hawaii for failing to comply with a court order and obstructing the investigation. Chad was not arrested at that time because charges had not yet been filed against him. He remained in Hawaii and regularly visited his wife in prison. However, investigators were already gathering evidence of his complicity. In May 2020, the case took on even more gruesome outlines. Alex Cox, Lori's brother, likely involved in the children's disappearance and the attack on Tammy, suddenly died in December 2019. An examination determined a natural cause of death, a blood clot in the lungs. However, the timing and circumstances of his death raised additional suspicions. By mid-2020, the investigation faced a series of mysterious deaths and disappearances connected to the Daybell couple. The disappearances of Tylene JJ, the death of Tammy, the murder of Charles Vallow, and the death of Alex Cox, all these events gradually formed a single picture of serial murders motivated by distorted religious beliefs and greed. While Lori awaited extradition to Idaho, investigators continued searching for the missing children. However, increasingly more evidence pointed to the worst scenario: Tylee and JJ would not be found alive. On June 9, 2020, the case of Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow reached its tragic climax. That day, law enforcement officers with a search warrant arrived at Daybell's house in Salem, Idaho. Armed with ground-penetrating radar and special equipment, detectives thoroughly searched the backyard of the property. What the investigators found shocked the entire country. In the backyard, in shallow graves, they discovered the remains of two children. First, they found the body of J.J. Vallow, wrapped in black plastic and bound with duct tape. A few hours after this, they uncovered another horrific evidence of crime: burnt human remains, which were later identified as the body of Tylee Ryan. Forensic experts established chilling details of the children's deaths. J.J. died from suffocation with a plastic bag and duct tape. Tylee's remains were so mutilated and burned that determining the exact cause of death proved difficult, but experts confidently stated the violent nature of the murder. That same day, police arrested Chad Daybell near his house. Initially, he was charged with destroying and concealing evidence, which was later supplemented with first-degree murder charges for Tylee, J.J., and his first wife Tammy Daybell. The investigation gained momentum. Investigators paid special attention to the geolocation data from Alex Cox's mobile phone, Lori's brother. According to GPS data, on September 9, 2019, the day after Tylee's last appearance, Cox's phone was on Daybell's property for 2 hours, exactly in the place where the girl's remains were later found. A similar situation occurred on September 23, 2019, on the day of JJ's disappearance. Cox's phone was again detected in Daybell's yard. Email correspondence, messages, and conversation records revealed a horrifying picture of the couple's apocalyptic beliefs, their obsession with the idea of zombies, and discussions of light ratings of various people, including Lori's children and Chad's former wife. In one message shortly before Tylee's disappearance, Chad referred to her as a dark spirit that needed liberation. Financial documents added important details to the crime mosaic. Lori continued to receive Social Security payments for JJ after his death, without reporting the boy's disappearance. Chad, for his part, received an insurance payout of $430,000 after Tammy's death, part of which he spent on his new life with Lori. Melanie Gibb, Lori's former friend, played a key role in the investigation. She recounted how Lori called her children zombies and spoke about the need to free their souls. Melanie also confirmed that Lori had deceived her about JJ's whereabouts, claiming that the boy was with her in Arizona. Investigators found a connection between Tammy Daybell's death and the couple's plans. Several weeks before Tammy's death, Chad searched the internet for information about insurance payouts in case of his wife's death. He also purchased a ring for Lori a week before Tammy's death, indicating a premeditated murder. The exhumation of Tammy's body and a re-examination revealed signs of violent death, most likely strangulation. The incident with the masked attacker, which Tammy reported 10 days before her death, was likely an unsuccessful attempt on her life, organized by Chad and Alex Cox. Special attention was drawn to a text message that Chad sent to Lori on September 9, 2019, after Tylee's disappearance: "I burned a limb and buried it in the backyard." Investigators interpreted this as a coded message that he had disposed of the girl's body, using the word limb as a code name. Daybell's neighbors confirmed that they saw unusual activity in his yard in the fall of 2019, including bonfires burning late into the night. One neighbor said that on the day of JJ's disappearance, he saw Alex Cox transporting some bags on a wheelbarrow around the property. A striking detail was that on the day of Tammy Daybell's funeral, October 22, 2019, Chad and Lori were already in Hawaii, choosing rings for their future wedding. This circumstance vividly demonstrated the couple's cynicism and indifference to the lives of those close to them. Investigators also determined the role of Alex Cox, who died in December 2019. Although he did not live to see the arrests, evidence pointed to his direct involvement in the murders. Geolocation data, eyewitness testimonies, and analysis of communications led to the conclusion that Cox acted as the executor of Chad and Lori's criminal intentions. By the summer of 2020, the Fremont County Prosecutor's Office had gathered sufficient evidence to charge Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow with first-degree murder of all three victims. They were also charged with conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and crimes against children. This investigation proved extremely complex due to the number of victims, the geographical dispersion of the crimes, and the convoluted motive that combined distorted religious beliefs with ordinary greed. For law enforcement, this was not just an investigation of a series of murders, but an immersion into the horrifying world of a cult built on apocalyptic fantasies. The public finally received answers to questions that had troubled them for almost a year: what happened to Lori's children and why Tammy Daybell died. The answers turned out to be even more horrifying than one could imagine. The children were killed by their own mother and her lover because of distorted religious beliefs and the desire to remove obstacles to their new life. After nearly 4 years of preparation and legal maneuvering, in April 2024, Chad Daybell's trial finally began in Ada County, Idaho. The case was transferred from Fremont County, where the murders took place, due to the impossibility of assembling an unbiased jury. The publicity in the local community was too extensive. The prosecution, led by Prosecutor Lindsay Blake and Special Prosecutor Rob Wood, presented a powerful body of evidence. Chad Daybell was charged with the first-degree murder of his wife Tammy Daybell, as well as 16-year-old Tylee Ryan and 7-year-old Joshua J.J. Vallow, the children of his second wife Lori Vallow. Additionally, he was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. The prosecution's strategy was built on three main directions. First, prosecutors thoroughly revealed Daybell's unusual religious beliefs, which he shared with Lori Vallow, including the idea that certain people could become zombies when their bodies are possessed by evil spirits. According to these beliefs, the only way to free a person from zombie status was to physically kill the body. Second, the prosecution provided evidence that Daybell and Vallow had a romantic relationship even before the deaths of their previous partners, establishing a motive for the murders. Finally, thorough forensic evidence was presented, indicating the violent nature of all three victims' deaths. The trial lasted almost 2 months, during which the jury heard testimony from over 60 witnesses. Among the most significant was the testimony of forensic experts regarding the circumstances of the victims' deaths. Forensic expert Dr. Hart established that Tammy Daybell died from asphyxiation, not from natural causes as Chad initially claimed. This information became crucial, as Daybell refused an autopsy of his first wife's body and rushed her burial after her death in October 2019. Shocking testimony from forensic archaeologists and anthropologists described in detail how the bodies of Tylee and J.J. were found in June 2020, buried on Daybell's ranch property in Salem, Idaho. Tylee's body was dismembered, burned, and buried in a shallow grave, while J.J. was wrapped in several layers of plastic, bound with duct tape, and buried separately. Testimonies from friends and acquaintances of the couple became extremely important to the case. Particularly significant was the testimony of Melanie Gibb, Lori's former friend, who described how Lori referred to her children as zombies and believed they needed to be freed. Audio recordings were also presented in which Daybell and Vallow discussed their apocalyptic beliefs and light and darkness ratings for people around them. Investigators provided electronic evidence, including text messages between Daybell and Vallow that revealed their romantic relationship before Tammy's death, as well as financial records showing that Daybell received insurance payouts after his wife's death and quickly used part of these funds to purchase an engagement ring for Lori. After nearly 8 weeks of trial, on May 28, 2024, the case was handed over to the jury for a verdict. The jurors needed less than 8 hours of deliberation to reach a unanimous decision. Chad Daybell was found guilty on all counts, 3 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and 2 counts of insurance fraud. The verdict triggered an emotional reaction from the victims' relatives present in the courtroom. Colin Reichert, Tylee's grandfather, and Kay Woodcock, JJ's grandmother, were visibly moved when the verdict was announced. Lori Vallow, who had already been convicted of murdering her children a year earlier and received a life sentence, was not present at the trial. Daybell himself remained outwardly impassive during the verdict announcement, although his defenders, John Pryor and Jim Arcabato, appeared disappointed with the outcome. The defense built their strategy around the thesis that, despite Daybell's unusual beliefs, there was insufficient direct evidence linking him to the actual murders. After Daybell was found guilty, the court moved to the sentencing phase. The prosecution demanded the harshest punishment, the death penalty, arguing the particularly cruel nature of the crimes committed against defenseless victims, including a young child. On June 1, 2024, Judge Stephen Boyce announced the sentence, the death penalty for each of the 3 murders. These crimes are among the most shocking and heartless that this court has ever faced, noted Judge Boyce during the sentencing. Particularly disturbing is the fact that these actions were motivated by distorted religious beliefs and financial gain. Before the sentence was announced, the court heard emotional statements from the victims' relatives. Kay Woodcock, JJ's grandmother, addressed Daybell directly, "You took away our most precious treasure, our grandson, whose life was just beginning. His smile, his hugs, his innocent joy, you took all of that away forever." Emma Murray, Tammy Daybell's daughter, also delivered a moving speech, "My mom was a light to everyone who knew her. She didn't deserve such a cruel fate from the person to whom she gave her heart and with whom she lived most of her life." After sentencing, Chad Daybell was transferred to death row at Idaho's maximum security prison, where he is now awaiting the automatic appeals process, which is standard procedure for all death penalty cases. This verdict made Daybell one of approximately 10 inmates awaiting execution in Idaho, a state where the last execution occurred in 2012. According to Idaho law, the death penalty is carried out by lethal injection, and the appeals process can take years or even decades before the sentence is carried out. The verdict for Chad Daybell brought a certain sense of closure to the victims' families, although the pain of loss remained irreparable. J.J. Vallow's grandparents, Kay and Larry Woodcock, who tirelessly fought for justice, expressed a bitter truth: "Justice has been served, but our grandson will forever remain 7 years old." For Tylee's brother, Colby Ryan, and his wife Kyla, the process was particularly painful. Colby not only lost his sister but also witnessed how his mother, Lori Vallow, fell under the influence of radical beliefs. "I feel relief that justice has been done, but it doesn't bring real healing. My sister was a bright, talented young woman," he shared after the verdict. Tammy Daybell's children found themselves in the most difficult situation. They lost their mother and were forced to reconsider everything they knew about their father. Emma Murray, Tammy's daughter, established a support foundation for children who have lost parents to violent crimes. "The hardest part was realizing that the person we knew as a loving father was capable of such horrible acts," she confessed. The small town of Salem, Idaho, where the murders took place, experienced collective trauma. "We all knew Chad as a respected person, an author, funeral home director, active church member," said local resident Jane Kowalski. "The thought that such a person is capable of such horrible crimes undermined our trust in one another." In the fall of 2023, the house in Salem where the children's bodies were found was demolished. This became a symbolic act for the community, an attempt to erase physical reminders of the tragedy. Many local residents gathered to pay tribute to the victims. The land plot remains empty, with proposals to create a memorial garden there. The case of Chad Daybell remains a painful reminder of how charismatic individuals can manipulate others' beliefs with the darkest intentions, and of the price paid by innocent victims. Life success always attracts the attention of others. It's natural, people are interested in those who have achieved significant heights. However, sometimes such interest can have tragic consequences, especially when wealth accumulated through years of hard work becomes the target of dangerous people's greed. This story reveals the dark side of human nature, demonstrating how trust and flattery can turn into betrayal, which still troubles both journalists and the public. On the eastern coast of New York State lies the picturesque town of Long Island, a prestigious seaside resort favored by wealthy Americans. For many years, this place was considered an oasis of peace and safety, where crime was practically non-existent. However, 2001 forever changed the reputation of this paradise. For the first time in 2 decades, a murder occurred here, the brutality of which shocked even experienced law enforcement officers and disrupted years of peaceful life in the local community. In the elite district of East Hampton Village, just a few minutes' walk from the ocean, stood a luxurious mansion. It was here that a tragedy unfolded that shook not only the local community but attracted the attention of the entire country. For the next 3 years, this event remained in the headlines of newspapers and television screens, as the victim was one of the most famous and successful residents of the city. Ted Ammon was an extraordinary individual. His life path is a story of a self-made millionaire who reached the top through his own intelligence and hard work. Despite his considerable wealth, he never forgot his origins and remained true to his principles. The future financier was born into an ordinary middle-class family in the provinces. After high school, he entered university, where he studied economics while playing lacrosse on the college team. Even then, Ted stood out among his peers. A tall, athletic, attractive young man from the provinces impressed everyone with his determination and quick wit. Outstanding intellectual abilities and academic success opened the doors to a prestigious career for Ted in the early 1980s. He specialized in leveraged buyouts and quickly became one of the best specialists in this field. Working as an investment banker at a small company he had started collaborating with as a student, Ted showed phenomenal results. Colleagues noted his natural intuition for profitable deals. Management even joked that he brought luck to the company, as each of his operations ended with significant profit. These qualities, combined with his work ethic, allowed Ted to quickly accumulate substantial capital. Yet he remained a modest person who didn't flaunt his wealth but simply performed his work more professionally than others. Ted's personal life changed in 1983 when his first marriage ended. Looking for new housing after the divorce, he scheduled a meeting with real estate agent Jennifer. Due to his busy work schedule, Ted couldn't make the appointed meeting. For those who knew him well, such behavior was typical. Everyone understood his dedication to work and could forgive such oversights. However, Jennifer, who didn't know Ted then, was outraged by his no-show and called to express her displeasure. Paradoxically, it was this emotional conversation that caught Ted's attention. Something in Jennifer's voice struck him, and he asked her out on a date. Thus began their relationship, which lasted 3 years. In 1986, the couple decided to formalize their relationship. Their marriage began with deep passion, which, however, began to fade over time. That same year, Ted's career reached new heights. He became a key figure in the decade's largest financial operation, moving to work at a larger company. A huge leveraged buyout deal worth $26 billion brought significant profits, part of which went to Ted. This success became a turning point in his career. By 1992, having accumulated enough experience and capital, he dared to start his own business, finally becoming completely independent in his financial decisions. Success in business allowed Ted to create a real estate empire. He consistently acquired luxurious houses not only in the United States but also abroad. His first significant purchase was elite property in the central part of the country, followed by a townhouse in Manhattan. Later, He acquired a huge estate in the English county of Surrey worth $6 million, which had over 50 rooms. Although the annual maintenance of all this property cost around $100,000, this wasn't a financial problem for Ted. Despite his considerable wealth, Ted remained a generous person. He was actively involved in charity, donating about $15 million to his university. Later, he established a charitable foundation to help children, which he included in his will. This luxurious lifestyle particularly appealed to Jennifer, especially considering her difficult past. She was born from a brief romance between her mother and an Italian sailor, about whom she knew almost nothing. When the girl turned 10, her mother died of cancer, and her father never appeared in her life. After this began her wanderings through foster families, a traumatic experience she preferred not to remember. Now Jennifer found herself in a completely different world. Their new house in the prestigious East Hampton Village district was a true masterpiece of English-style architecture. 6 bedrooms, numerous guest bathrooms, a spacious kitchen, solarium, gym, and library created an atmosphere of luxury and comfort. The mansion was complemented by a heated pool and a separate guest house, all situated on a huge 90-acre plot with a picturesque pond. Despite her new life, Jennifer, like her husband, didn't forget about her past. Unable to have children of her own, the couple adopted 11-year-old twins, Greg and Alexander. For Jennifer, this was a way to save children from the trials she had gone through herself. However, over time, Jennifer's behavior began to raise concerns. The first warning signs were her unjustified breaks in relationships with friends, where she always presented herself as a victim of circumstances. Her character became unpredictable, with the smallest things capable of triggering outbursts of anger. A telling incident occurred when she ordered the planting of 60 tulips in their East Hampton estate, then personally uprooted all the flowers simply because their shade didn't match her expectations. The dramatic changes in Jennifer's behavior particularly affected her relationship with her husband, which was once considered exemplary. Trying to save their marriage, the couple decided to radically change their environment and move to Great Britain. However, work obligations forced Ted to return to the USA. It was then that Jennifer began to suspect her husband of having an affair with a colleague. Driven by these suspicions, she took the children and returned to New York in 1999, settling in the townhouse. To dispel or confirm her doubts, she hired a private detective who discovered that her fears were not unfounded. Ted indeed had a young mistress. This discovery marked the beginning of the end of their marriage. The situation was complicated by Jennifer's suspicions about her husband's attempts to hide part of their joint property. She was convinced that his wealth amounted to at least $300 million. However, after careful evaluation by lawyers, it was revealed that Ted's actual capital was $80 million, half of which Jennifer expected to receive after the divorce. After this, she moved with the children to a luxurious hotel, initiating a massive renovation of the townhouse. The project involved a complete reconstruction worth about $9 million. To begin the work, Jennifer took out a $3 million loan. All these expenses, hotel accommodation, renovation work, and the loan, fell on Ted's shoulders. At this time, a new character entered the story. On Central Long Island, Danny Polici heard from a friend about a wealthy woman who was spending millions on reconstructing her townhouse. Danny was an unlicensed electrician without stable work, who could barely support his wife and 3 children. Gathering his last money for fuel, he headed to Manhattan in search of work, hoping to save his own family from financial problems. His venture proved successful. Jennifer hired him and quickly developed a romantic relationship with him. Danny gained access not only to her bedroom but also to her wallet. The story of a wealthy lady's affair with a simple electrician instantly became the object of public attention, fueled by Danny's own behavior as he bragged about his new opportunities and spent money lavishly. Ted learned about this relationship but could do nothing. Their marriage was already destroyed, and lawyers continued to work on the divorce process and property division. Jennifer and Danny bonded over their similar life experiences. A woman who grew up in poverty well understood the life struggles of her new choice. She perceived Ted as a traitor who broke her heart and sought revenge. Perhaps she hoped to find happiness with someone from her original social level. Jennifer used Danny as an instrument of revenge against her former husband. The townhouse renovation became increasingly expensive, requiring ever more expenditure from Ted's savings. Meanwhile, Danny wasn't actually doing much work, preferring to enjoy entertainment with his wealthy patron and friends. While Jennifer's life was taking on new colors, Ted was deeply troubled by the situation, especially worrying about its impact on the children. These concerns led him to abuse alcohol, even resulting in several DUI arrests. His concerns about wastefulness were not unfounded. Danny quickly adapted to the luxurious life, giving generous $100 tips in restaurants and spending thousands of dollars on entertainment with Jennifer after meeting friends. He openly called this relationship his lucky ticket, behaving like a typical gold digger, without genuine feelings for his wealthy patron. By summer 2001, Danny had effectively taken Ted's place in Jennifer's life, although the divorce wasn't yet finalized. He settled in the East Hampton mansion, used Ted's premium car, and even wore his clothes. As an irony of fate, he too was once arrested for drunk driving. By the end of 2001, lawyers finally agreed on divorce terms. After deducting all debts, renovation costs, and taxes, Ted was left with $46 million, half of which Jennifer was to receive after the process completion. However, even this amount seemed insufficient to her. When all formalities were almost complete, hope for new happiness appeared in Ted's life. Friends noticed how his spirits lifted, a new woman had entered his life, with whom he planned to start afresh. Despite being 52 years old and having overcome the most difficult period of his life, he remained energetic and looked younger than his age. On Saturday, October 20, 2001, Ted spent the evening in his usual style, dined at a restaurant, walked on the beach, talked on the phone with his new love. Late in the evening, he returned to his mansion in East Hampton. This was the last time he was seen alive. On Monday, when Ted didn't show up for an important business meeting and didn't pick up the children from school, which was completely unlike him, concerned colleagues began searching for him. After numerous unsuccessful attempts to call him, his business partner and secretary rented a helicopter and flew to East Hampton. On site, they found a disturbing scene. Ted's car was in the driveway, dogs were running around the yard, the garage doors were open, and the alarm was turned off. Entering through unlocked doors, they searched the first floor, but Ted was nowhere to be found. Alarmed by the situation, they called the police. Ted's body was found in the bedroom, lying in a pool of blood. Nearby lay a stack of money with several $1,000s, a clear sign that this wasn't a robbery. The autopsy showed that the victim had received no less than 30 blows to the head with a blunt object, presumably a baseball bat. These injuries led to massive bleeding and proved incompatible with life. According to experts, Ted was killed almost immediately after returning home on Saturday evening. The brutal nature of the attack indicated personal motives. The attacker clearly left the victim no chance of survival. Shortly after the murder, Ted's first wife contacted the detectives. Despite their divorce 20 years ago, they had maintained a friendly relationship and communicated regularly. She passed on to the police a disturbing message from Ted, left 2 days before his death. During their conversation about the divorce process, he shared his fears about Jennifer. Ted even joked that she wouldn't rest until he was dead, words that proved eerily prophetic. However, suspicions alone were insufficient for charges. Investigators were also troubled by the fact that physically, Jennifer could hardly have overpowered Ted herself, who was significantly larger and stronger even than her lover Danny. This suggested possible accomplice involvement. Detectives focused their attention on Jennifer and her companion, but the investigation hit a dead end. No murder weapon, fingerprints, or other evidence was found at the crime scene. Forensic experts worked continuously for several weeks but without results. In mid-November 2001, the opening of Ted's will revealed an important detail: the document hadn't been updated since 1995. A new version, which would have deprived Jennifer of inheritance in case of her former husband's death, was still with lawyers for finalization. Under the current will, she received half of the wealth, while the other half went to Ted's charitable foundation. This provided a strong motive for murder. Presumably, the prospect of becoming a wealthy widow seemed more attractive than being left with nothing. When investigators tried to speak with Jennifer and Danny, they categorically refused to cooperate. The couple barricaded themselves in the mansion and hired a team of top lawyers. Despite legal advice to avoid publicity, they continued to attract media attention. Danny hastily divorced his wife and immediately married Jennifer. Jennifer's behavior raised eyebrows. She showed no signs of grief for her deceased husband. On the contrary, she seemed quite satisfied with the situation. This heightened detective suspicions, although it was only circumstantial evidence. The case gained nationwide attention. All American media covered the developments, particularly criticizing the actions of the couple's lawyers who tried to shield them from the investigation. Meanwhile, Danny moved with the children to another mansion that had passed into Jennifer's possession. He began living a luxurious lifestyle, buying expensive cars and yachts, regularly traveling to Las Vegas where he would lose thousands of dollars at a time. Jennifer often joined him, carelessly spending the wealth that her late husband had accumulated through decades of hard work. The carefree life lasted only a month before Danny had to return to Long Island to address a DUI case. In reality, this was a tactical move by law enforcement, who were concerned that the suspect might flee abroad and hide there. Finding himself in the media spotlight, Danny couldn't contain his desire to communicate with the press, even when discussing possible involvement in the terrible crime. As always, he talked too much. During this period, his wife lived with him in their Southampton residence. Local residents constantly complained about loud parties and drunken antics by the couple, which occurred almost nightly. Jennifer's public appearances in a state of heavy intoxication became particularly noticeable. The couple's behavior drew condemnation from the local elite. By May 2002, the situation had significantly worsened. The woman began experiencing systematic losses of consciousness. A month later, doctors delivered a grim diagnosis: late-stage kidney cancer. While Jennifer began chemotherapy, Danny pleaded guilty in the DUI case, for which he received a 1-year prison sentence. Released in June 2003, he hoped the Ted murder case had been forgotten. However, the investigation never stopped for a single day, remaining under constant media scrutiny. The investigation still lacked key evidence. The murder weapon wasn't found, there was no direct evidence of Danny and Jennifer's involvement, and the suspects themselves didn't confess. However, all circumstantial evidence pointed to them. Detectives carefully gathered all details to build an irrefutable system of evidence. An important discovery was finding that the couple had previously installed a surveillance system in the mansion to monitor Ted. Logically, the cameras should have recorded the moment of attack, but upon checking, it was discovered that the hard drive had been removed. This circumstance became another important piece of circumstantial evidence, as only 2 people knew about the camera's existence. Jennifer's health rapidly deteriorated, and it became obvious she was losing her battle with cancer. Aware of her limited time, she made a will according to which the main part of the property would pass to her children and the charitable foundation. She allocated $2 million to her husband, intended for paying lawyers' fees. In July 2003, the woman moved with her children to another mansion of her former husband, finally ending her relationship with Danny. She wanted to spend her last days surrounded by her closest family. A month later, she passed away. The children were orphaned again, and a legal battle for custody erupted between their nanny and aunt, Ted's sister. For a time, the twins were separated. Greg was sent to boarding school, while Alex remained living with the nanny. Eventually, the aunt received custody, and the children moved to her home in Huntsville, Alabama. Soon after, Danny was again in the media spotlight. He was formally charged with the millionaire's murder. The prosecution had all the necessary components for the charges: motive, means, and opportunity to commit the crime. Finally, enough evidence had been gathered which, in the prosecution's opinion, would convince the jury. A court confrontation was approaching, for which Danny's lawyers, hired with money left by Jennifer, were carefully preparing. The investigation proved extremely meticulous. Investigators needed 9 months to interview about 60 witnesses from Danny's inner circle. Given his tendency for excessive talking, detectives hoped to obtain important information from people to whom he might have confided. Although most interviewees provided no substantial information, some testimonies proved critically important to the case. The first warning signs appeared a year before the tragedy. Then Danny, finding himself in financial distress after spending all his lover's money and unable even to buy her flowers, openly declared his readiness to commit murder to obtain money from the millionaire. After committing the crime, he couldn't restrain himself in conversations with friends, describing in detail how he beat Ted to death. With particular enthusiasm, he recounted how the victim begged for his life and cried, but this evoked no sympathy from him. These horrifying details were later confirmed by other witnesses, with Danny continuing to boast about his crime even after marrying Jennifer. The defense's main trump card was Danny's alibi for the night of the murder, initially confirmed by his sister who lived 60 kilometers from the crime scene. However, during re-questioning, the woman significantly changed her testimony. She revealed that while her brother and a friend did arrive around 3 in the morning, Danny only retrieved something from the attic and left around 2 o'clock, returning only at 8 in the morning. Careful analysis of the time frames showed that the suspect had enough time to drive to East Hampton, commit the murder, and return. A particularly important detail was the sister's recollection that when hugging her brother goodbye, she felt some heavy object resembling a bat in his leather jacket. When she asked about it, Danny gave no response. The investigation reconstructed the likely sequence of events. Danny stopped at his sister's for the murder weapon, then spent 45 minutes driving to Ted's house, entered, and set up an ambush. The attack was sudden and brutal. After losing consciousness, the victim received numerous blows to the head, leading to complete skull destruction and instant death. Danny's morning return was confirmed by his sister, who was awake and could precisely indicate the time, becoming an important argument in refuting his alibi. The next day, a telling conversation occurred between Danny and his father. The suspect persistently inquired about reliable ways to hide objects. His unsuspecting father suggested several options: sending for recycling, throwing in the trash, and other possibilities, unknowingly helping his son dispose of the murder weapon. Despite thorough investigation of all these versions, the presumed baseball bat was never found. Having gathered sufficient evidence, the prosecution decided to give Danny one last chance. On March 23, 2004, almost 2.5 years after the murder, he was offered a plea deal in exchange for confession. However, the suspect refused, disappointing both law enforcement and the public who closely followed the case's development. Eventually, Danny was charged with second-degree murder, which carried a punishment ranging from 25 years to life imprisonment. A surprise for everyone was the appearance of 2 new witnesses on the day of trial, Danny's former cellmates, to whom he had confessed during his previous incarceration. Their testimony became an important trump card for the prosecution. At trial, shocking details of the crime emerged from Danny's own confessions made in prison. According to him, he brutally attacked Ted with a baseball bat, methodically delivering blows with the intention of breaking every bone in the victim's body. Furthermore, it was revealed that the defendant had attempted to influence the trial through intimidation. He even threatened prosecutors' children after learning about the composition of the prosecution team. The investigation also established an important detail: Danny regularly used a stun gun, often playfully using it on friends. This explained the origin of characteristic marks on Ted's body. Presumably, the killer first incapacitated the physically stronger victim with a stun gun before continuing the attack. An unexpected turn in the trial occurred when a defense witness revealed intimate details of Ted's personal life, claiming he simultaneously maintained relationships with several women. The lawyers used this information, trying to expand the circle of potential suspects, suggesting that any of the millionaire's numerous connections could have been in his house that fatal night. The trial's drama was heightened by Danny's decision to testify personally in his defense. His confrontation with the prosecutor, known for his uncompromising nature, lasted 5 hours under the watchful eye of dozens of journalists, noticeably making the defendant nervous. In an attempt to save their client, the defense chose a strategy of shifting blame to the deceased Jennifer. Danny claimed that she had once proposed killing Ted, but he refused. Through this, the lawyers tried to sow doubt in the jurors' minds, presenting the millionaire's second wife as a potential killer. However, the truth about her possible role in this brutal crime will forever remain a mystery. Jennifer passed away 2 years after Ted's death. After lengthy weekend deliberations, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Danny, who until this moment had maintained the image of a successful businessman, couldn't hold back tears. The court sentenced him to 25 years imprisonment. Even after the verdict, he continued to insist on his innocence. Years after the tragedy, Ted's adopted children put the empty house in the Hamptons up for sale for $12 million but eventually agreed to $8 million. The estate needs major renovation, and the new owners are still hesitating between reconstructing it and complete demolition to start from scratch. Rachel Winkler's life could have turned out very differently. She dreamed of a happy marriage, but after giving birth to 3 children, her married life was on the verge of collapse. When Rachel met another man and asked for a divorce, her husband reacted extremely negatively. This story ended tragically, and later, disturbing details emerged about the suspicious death of his previous wife. A question arose: was he a black widow who systematically disposed of his wives? Rachel's story begins in California, where she was born in 1975 into a typical American family. She was the second child of 4 in the family of Don and Diana, having 3 brothers. They seemed like an ordinary happy family, but when she was 10 years old, their lives changed dramatically. Her mother's brief affair with a neighbor led to her father leaving the family, and the marriage fell apart. After her parents' divorce, Rachel moved to Georgia with her mother and brothers. Although she had the opportunity to visit her father, these meetings were infrequent and marked by tension. The situation was complicated by her mother turning the children against their father, who unsuccessfully tried to gain custody through court. The emotional turmoil associated with the family's breakdown deeply affected Rachel. In her teenage years, she developed anorexia. Her weight critically dropped to 66 pounds, posing a real threat to her life. The situation became so serious that she had to be hospitalized at the Modesto Psychiatric Clinic. Fortunately, thanks to professional help, she managed to overcome the illness, restore her health, and even began participating in sports. The recovery period positively impacted Rachel's relationship with her father. Despite not always approving of her life choices, they established a special bond. As the only daughter among 4 children, she became her father's muse, and he was proud of her exceptional intellectual abilities. Since school, Rachel demonstrated outstanding academic success, receiving excellent grades in all subjects. In adult life, she tried to follow in the footsteps of her father, successful impressionist artist Don Hatfield. It was in high school where she met Tim, who also had a passion for art. Their relationship became serious, and after graduation, the young couple decided to live together. The beginning of their life together proved challenging due to financial difficulties typical for newcomers in the art field. When painting commissions were scarce, the couple took on creating murals for interior decoration. This direction proved more profitable and allowed them to rent better housing, though both understood it couldn't be their life's work. While this model worked successfully for Rachel's father, the young couple, often facing commission instability, sought alternative paths. Meanwhile, Rachel studied at Sonoma State University, where she earned a degree in business and marketing. Her mathematical abilities impressed both her father and professors from her first year. After graduating with honors, she was offered a promising high-paying job, which she accepted. Despite her own professional success, Rachel continued to support Tim's creative aspirations, helping him manage his art business. At the time, it seemed success was just around the corner for him too. Their relationship lasted 14 years, and all their acquaintances were convinced this couple was meant for a happy married life and raising children. Rachel's life took a new turn as she approached her 30th birthday. Thoughts of motherhood visited her more frequently, but her longtime partner Tim didn't share this aspiration. His vision of the future was more pragmatic: first financial stability, owning a house, solid ground under their feet. But Rachel felt she couldn't wait any longer, and this became the beginning of their relationship's deterioration. By early 2005, their union was balancing on the edge of breaking up. The fateful change in Rachel's life occurred at a dinner party where she met Todd Winkler. He was 8 years older than her, had an impressive career as a fighter pilot in the U.S. Air Force, a degree in computer engineering, and a thriving internet business. His life success was embodied in a luxurious house and his own airplane. Todd not only radiated an aura of success but also attracted with his appearance and way of communication. He had 2 marriages behind him. The first ended in divorce due to youth and disappointment, and his second wife tragically died in a car accident in 1999. From their first meeting, Todd and Rachel had special chemistry. He immediately felt he had found the person he had been looking for to start a new life. Rachel was also enchanted by him, feeling the mutual attraction. Their acquaintance quickly turned into a romance, after which she ended her relationship with Tim, deciding to start a new life. Their feelings were so strong that within days they were discussing their future together and children. Less than a month later, Todd arranged unforgettable engagement. At a party, a hired pilot wrote, "Marry me," in the sky. Such a grandiose gesture made an incredible impression on Rachel, and she couldn't resist such a romantic proposal. Her former partner Tim no longer had any chance to win her back, no matter how hard he tried. Rachel enthusiastically told all her close ones about her dream man and the upcoming wedding. That summer, their luxurious wedding took place, and Rachel became Mrs. Winkler. Her life filled with possibilities she could only dream of before. She quickly forgot about more than a decade spent with Tim, years of joint struggle with financial difficulties. Many understood her choice. After years of living in poverty, it was hard to resist the opportunity to fulfill all her dreams. The couple's happiness multiplied when Rachel became pregnant a year after the wedding. On April 11, 2007, their first daughter Eva was born, and a year later, their second daughter Aurel. Rachel devoted herself to housekeeping and raising children while her husband provided for the family. In early 2010, changes occurred in their lives. Todd received a management position at a prestigious pharmaceutical company in Alameda, which was 2 hours away from home. The family lived in an elite airpark where each owner had a personal hangar for their private aircraft. Tired of maternity life, Rachel took a job as the local airport manager with her husband's consent. It was there, in September 2009, when Todd was away from home, that fate brought her together with James White, a former Marine who was doing repair work at the airport. They developed a friendly communication. Over time, the Winklers' married life began to lose its initial luster. The once passionate feeling that united them gradually faded. Close friends noticed how Rachel had changed. Her eyes lost their former sparkle, and there was no trace of her previous happiness. Todd couldn't help but notice his wife's growing closeness with James. He was troubled that Rachel was spending more time with her colleague than with him. Suspecting that feelings were developing between them, he sought advice from his father-in-law Don, a deeply religious man devoted to family values. Rachel's father strongly condemned his daughter's behavior, seeing it as a threat of moral decline. This situation particularly worried Don, as similar circumstances had once destroyed his own family and led his beloved daughter to the dangerous edge of anorexia. During an honest conversation with Rachel, her father shared his bitter experience. He confessed that he regretted his decision to leave the family due to his wife's infidelity, acknowledging that his stubbornness had caused pain to all his loved ones. Although the past couldn't be changed, he begged his daughter to come to her senses and abandon the new relationship. Despite her father's warnings and disapproving looks from others, Rachel couldn't give up communicating with James, to whom she felt a strong attraction. In conversations with her friends, she openly admitted her feelings for him. Todd acutely felt the threat to his marriage and constantly consulted with his father-in-law, who persistently urged him to preserve the family. Eventually, Rachel acknowledged the truth in her father's words, realizing that it would be difficult to provide a decent future for her children on her own. She decided to stay with Todd, which greatly pleased her father. Todd forgave his wife, and it seemed their relationship had improved. Soon, the couple announced they were expecting their third child. Todd dreamed of a son and heir to his business, while Rachel was ready to accept a third daughter. In March 2011, leaving their children with Dawn, the couple traveled to Florida to strengthen their renewed relationship. Outwardly, it appeared the Winklers had managed to revive their love. Although Rachel claimed she was pregnant by her husband, some suspected James might be the father. In reality, hidden conflicts continued to rage behind the facade of family idol. After the vacation, a serious argument occurred, after which Todd left for an extended business trip to Australia. Although he paid for his father-in-law's visit, he didn't invite his wife and children to join him. This might have been explained by the difficulty of long-distance travel for a pregnant woman and small children, but it could also indicate a serious crisis in their relationship. During Todd's stay in Australia, where he traveled with his father-in-law Don, Rachel's life took its own course. She renewed communication with her first love, the artist Tim. In their conversations, she shared various stories from her wealthy life, including how her husband had put credit cards in her name to buy an airplane, leaving her with $50,000 in debt, which Todd easily paid off. For Tim, who still had feelings for Rachel, such conversations were painful, but he hadn't lost hope of rekindling their relationship. Rachel simply enjoyed the attention during her period of loneliness. When her younger child grew older, Rachel, seeking self-fulfillment, returned to work at the airport, sending her children to daycare. Her religious father Don didn't approve of this decision, believing that a wealthy woman should devote herself to home and children. However, Todd yielded to his wife's desire to work and socialize. During this time, James's business appeared near Rachel's workplace. Her father warned her against meeting him, understanding the depth of their feelings. James, who had himself experienced 2 marriages and was looking for new relationships, initially kept his distance, not wanting to destroy someone else's family. The situation changed dramatically in early June 2010, when Rachel called James and confessed her feelings, expressing her unwillingness to continue life with her husband. Despite both being married, they began meeting secretly. Todd's absence, living in Australia, facilitated their encounters. James even grew close to Rachel's children. However, hiding their relationship from vigilant neighbors proved difficult, and rumors soon began to spread. Unable to bear the double life, James filed for divorce, revealing the truth about Rachel to his wife. James's enraged wife informed Todd about the affair, who begged Rachel to end the relationship for the sake of their family and children. Although Rachel promised to break off the connection with her lover, their meetings continued, becoming even more secretive. Rachel's father, Don, strongly condemned his daughter's behavior and supported his son-in-law, often providing him advice in phone conversations. In an attempt to resolve the situation, Rachel's father suggested organizing a meeting between the 3 men for a calm discussion. When Todd and Don arrived at James's house, he had just finished target shooting practice with his daughter Caitlin. Despite the tense situation, James and his daughter were still holding their weapons. The meeting proceeded without incident. Todd expressed his position: he still loved Rachel, they had children together, and he asked James to stay away from their family. Although James agreed, in reality, he had no intention of ending his relationship with Rachel. They were already planning their future together. In conversations with James, Rachel painted her married life in dark colors. She spoke of domestic tyranny, although there was no evidence of this, and even claimed her 3rd pregnancy was the result of rape. These stories aroused anger in James and a desire to protect his loved one, which could lead to dangerous developments. In October 2011, during a meeting with university friends, Rachel revealed details of her family life. According to her, her husband restricted her financially. She had to borrow money even for basic necessities for the children. She complained about the dilapidated state of their house, which Todd refused to repair, and about his control and manipulation. Rachel claimed that the third child was the result of pressure from her husband, who was trying to bind her more tightly to himself. She repeated these stories to at least 3 friends. One of her friends, who worked as a lawyer, consulted Rachel about a possible divorce. Rachel wanted to sort out financial matters and reach a fair agreement with her husband regarding property division and alimony, but Todd refused divorce. In November 2011, the situation escalated. Rachel stopped paying the mortgage, claiming her husband was hiding income from her. She began to fear his intentions. On November 11, taking advantage of her husband's absence during a business trip to Amsterdam, Rachel informed her lawyer friend about her readiness to start divorce proceedings. By February 2012, she had prepared the necessary documents but discovered that the electronic forms had disappeared from her laptop. According to her, Todd had deleted them. She began filling out the documents by hand. Learning of his wife's intention to divorce, Todd turned to his father-in-law. He expressed concern about Rachel's mental state, mentioning her harmful habits, smoking and alcohol, as well as possible return of weight problems. Although her father regularly saw Rachel and noticed no problems with her health or behavior, she explained her weight loss as stress from the approaching divorce process. The family tension reached a critical point. In February 2012, a business partner noticed Todd's depressed state and suggested possible mental health issues. However, Todd insisted that his wife was the one with problems, and even considered the possibility of her treatment in a psychiatric clinic, claiming she was abusing alcohol and needed rest. This conversation took place on February 10. Rachel was preparing for the divorce proceedings scheduled for February 26, 2012. She expected to receive significant alimony corresponding to Todd's high income and planned to move with the children to James's place. However, that evening she didn't show up at her lover's house and didn't answer calls even the next day. As it later turned out, she was no longer alive. On the morning of February 27, a neighbor saw an outwardly calm Todd with the children. Around 10:30, Todd handed the children over to the neighbor, explaining that something terrible had happened in the house, and he was waiting for the police to arrive. The neighbor noted Todd's unusual calmness and the absence of visible injuries. That morning, Todd called 911, reporting the death of 37-year-old Rachel following a domestic argument. When police arrived around 10:40, he came out of the house with raised, bandaged hands and reported his wife's death. Her body was found on the floor near their eldest child's bed. After his arrest, Todd agreed to speak with investigators without a lawyer, maintaining an unusual calmness. He told them about his wife's lover, her intentions to divorce and gain full custody of the children. According to him, a conflict erupted between them over her behavior. In a fit of anger, he attacked her, but hearing a child crying, he took the children to another room. When he returned, the argument continued. Todd hit his wife in the face, and she responded in kind. Although he began to apologize, Rachel approached him with large scissors and wounded his hands. During the struggle for the scissors, Todd noted his wife's excellent physical condition, which made it difficult for him to handle her. He managed to knock the scissors away by pressing his thumb into her eye, after which he ran from the room to take the children to safety. According to Todd, he feared his wife's unstable state, believing she was drunk and could pose a threat to him and the children. After leaving the children with a neighbor and returning home, he found Rachel on the bedroom floor. When she approached him, she kicked him in the face. In a burst of uncontrollable rage, events took a tragic turn. First, the woman knocked him to the floor and began choking him with both hands. Then she suddenly grabbed the scissors, but he instantly managed to take them away. Defending himself, he dealt several strong blows to her face and neck. Despite the woman begging to spare her life, promising to preserve their marriage, the man could no longer control his anger. By his own admission, he thrust the scissors into her neck with all his might and continued to press. Later, he claimed that at that moment he really wanted her death, although he hadn't planned it in advance. Everything happened spontaneously. When Todd realized the consequences of his actions, he tried to resuscitate his wife, but it was too late. In a state of shock, he attempted to clean up the crime scene, washing away blood traces. Later, realizing the futility of his efforts, he called 911. Detectives treated his testimony with significant skepticism, finding numerous inconsistencies. It seemed illogical that after taking the children to the neighbor, Rachel calmly waited for his return after the fight, not taking the opportunity to escape. It was also doubtful that he barely managed to handle his wife, who was half his size. The timing of events was also unclear, how he managed to do all this if he took the children away at 10:30 and called the police almost immediately. The medical examiner's findings completely refuted his version. They determined that the woman had died 6 hours before the 911 call. During the autopsy, extensive damage was found on Rachel's body, broken ribs, numerous abrasions across her body, cuts and stab wounds primarily on her face and neck. The fatal wound was a penetrating injury that severed the carotid artery. It took several minutes for Rachel to die from blood loss. Numerous defensive cuts and injuries on her hands and body indicated her active resistance to the attacker. Analysis showed that at the time of death, she was almost sober. Her alcohol level only slightly exceeded the state's legal driving limit. The nature of her injuries indicated excessive violence in the attack, contradicting the self-defense version. Detectives investigating the case became interested in the circumstances of Todd's previous wife Catherine's death. They decided to review the materials of that case, which had been closed as an accident due to a car crash. The reopened archives revealed a complicated history. In September 1999, the Winkler family went for a forest drive. According to Todd's testimony, he was stung by a bee, which caused a severe allergic reaction. Needing urgent medical attention, he lay down in the back seat while his wife took the wheel of the pickup truck to get to the hospital as quickly as possible. On the way, the vehicle plunged off a mountain. Catherine died, while Todd survived. According to him, he climbed out of the vehicle and went to seek help. Tourists camping in the Chattahoochee National Forest in Georgia responded to the noise. They helped call rescue workers. Todd explained the disappearance of his allergy symptoms as an adrenaline rush during the accident. This story raised suspicions from the very beginning. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, the entire crash site was engulfed in flames, and rescuers couldn't immediately descend due to the difficult terrain. The descent proved so steep that rescuers had to use special equipment and ropes. Many questions arose about how a person in such a helpless state could not only climb to the mountain top but also go seeking help. Particularly strange was that despite the hot weather, the man was wearing winter clothing. He explained his unusual attire as chills from fever due to the insect sting. According to his account, he was in the vehicle with his wife at the moment of the crash. However, no injuries or scratches were found on his body, which raised serious doubts considering the scale of the crash. He explained his lack of injuries by saying he was thrown from the pickup, and the warm winter clothing saved him from trauma. When asked to show the insect sting site, he couldn't do so, explaining he had forgotten due to experienced fear. Medical examination also found no traces of a sting. According to his version, the accident happened because his wife lost control due to excessive speed. Catherine Winkler, his previous wife, grew up in a military family along with her sister Christina Carlisle. Catherine was distinguished not only by her beauty but also by her gentle character, which naturally attracted people to her. When she met Todd, she was 23 and was dating another pilot. However, Todd's charm proved stronger. Catherine fell in love with him, radiating incredible happiness. Like Rachel later, she broke off her previous relationship and quickly married him. Throughout their 8-year marriage, Catherine was a devoted wife, accompanying him on business trips to Japan and Norway, supporting him after his nervous breakdown. Eventually, the couple settled in Georgia, where Todd started an internet business. Their life together ended in tragedy in 1999. Catherine's autopsy established the cause of death, asphyxiation from caustic smoke and thermal burns. The body was so badly burned that determining the exact cause of death and nature of injuries proved difficult. However, the medical examiner found no signs of violent death, and the death of Todd Winkler's second wife was officially ruled an accident. After the tragedy, Todd received an insurance payout for his wife's death, over $1 million. He severed all ties with Catherine's friends and relatives, who suspected the accident was staged for money. Their suspicions intensified after Rachel's death. They became fully convinced that Catherine's death was an intentional murder. 15 years later, the successful businessman found himself in the defendant's dock for the murder of his third wife Rachel. His testimony constantly changed during interrogations. The same situation was observed when he gave testimony regarding Catherine's death. Given his involvement in the previous suspicious case, investigators suspected that Rachel's murder was long planned. During this period, Tom, Rachel's father, received full custody of his grandchildren. He saw this as an opportunity to correct the mistakes of his youth when he destroyed his own family. Now he had a chance to experience the joy of parenthood he had longed for after his divorce but couldn't then obtain. Tom believed that his daughter was killed not because of her extramarital affair, which Todd had come to terms with, nor because of the upcoming divorce. In his opinion, the real reason was some secrets that Rachel threatened to reveal, possibly related to the suspicious death of the previous wife or to an incident in the Air Force after which Todd had a nervous breakdown. That's why she feared her husband, and that's why he forced her to be silent forever. Rachel's family members testified about past instances of domestic violence. Specifically, Rachel's brother personally witnessed an attack on his sister at a bar in Sandy Springs in 2006. Rachel repeatedly told her close ones that she felt threatened by her husband, and if anything happened to her, he would be the one responsible. A particularly revealing incident was described by the couple's elder daughter. One day, her mother discovered an urn containing the ashes of Todd's previous wife in the closet and commented, "I hope I never turn to ashes." To which Todd ominously replied, "Just never make me angry." These words caused genuine horror in both mother and daughter. During the trial, other disturbing episodes came to light. For instance, during a vacation in Florida, while night diving, Todd allegedly abandoned Rachel alone in the water, causing her to nearly drown before barely making it back to the boat. In another incident, he allegedly tried to throw her off during a motorcycle ride. However, these stories, which Rachel had told to her friends, remained unconfirmed, especially considering her tendency to exaggerate. The investigation revealed that the accused suffered from mental disorders. He was diagnosed with dissociative and conversion disorder, which caused detachment from reality. However, psychiatric evaluation found him competent to stand trial. Todd tried to exploit his mental condition to reduce his sentence and even simulated psychosis during one of the court sessions, but this tactic proved unsuccessful. The prosecution insisted that the murder was premeditated. According to their version, Todd entered the bedroom with scissors while Rachel was sleeping and took her life. Afterward, he had 6 hours to stage signs of struggle, inflict defensive wounds on himself, bandage them, destroy evidence, and take care of the children, feed them and take them to the neighbors. Only then did he call emergency services. Blood traces found on children's dishes indicated that he prepared breakfast after killing their mother. Later, Todd admitted that he indeed didn't immediately seek help. His version of events didn't align with the timeline. According to him, he first took the children to a neighbor, then killed his wife and called for help. However, medical examination established that by the time of the emergency call, Rachel had been dead for several hours. Moreover, the nature of his wound bandaging indicated it wasn't done in haste. The defense insisted on self-defense, claiming that Rachel was the aggressor. She grabbed the scissors first and attacked her husband. During the struggle, Todd allegedly faced a choice, his life or hers, and he chose his survival. The trial, including examination of all circumstances and testimony, lasted 13 days. After this, the jury returned a guilty verdict. 47-year-old Todd Winkler was found guilty of first-degree murder. In December 2014, the court sentenced him to 26 years in prison with the possibility of parole in June 2031, when he will be 64 years old. Despite all his appeals being rejected, Todd managed to secure special detention conditions. He is currently serving his sentence in comfortable conditions at San Quentin State Prison in California. The tragic story began on a sunny day of May 30, 2010, when a young 21-year-old Peruvian woman, Stephany Flores Ramírez, decided to try her luck at a poker tournament at the Atlantic City Casino in Lima. The girl had every reason to be optimistic. Just a few days ago, she had won $10,000. Before leaving, she told her father she would return in a few days, not suspecting that this trip would become fatal for her. Stephany came from a prominent and respected family. Her father, Ricardo Flores, was not only a successful race car driver but also ran for president of Peru. The large Flores family had 5 children, 4 sons and the youngest daughter Stephany, who was especially protected and loved by all. Despite their high social status and wealth, the family remained humble and genuine in their interactions, leading a normal lifestyle. Stephany's brothers were involved in organizing various events, while she herself combined her studies in her 3rd year at the Business Administration faculty of the University of Lima with work in the family business. Additionally, she had a special talent for gambling, which brought her considerable profit. When Stephany didn't return home after the tournament, her absence caused serious concern for her father. Such behavior was completely uncharacteristic for the responsible young woman who had never disappeared before. Ricardo immediately sought help from his sons. Attempts to reach their sister proved futile, as did numerous calls to her friends and acquaintances. The brothers searched the entire area but to no avail. Without wasting time, the father contacted law enforcement. The police began their investigation by visiting the hotel where the poker tournament was held. The establishment staff couldn't shed light on the participants' disappearance, so detectives focused on examining surveillance camera footage. Review of the video materials from the corridor near the conference hall revealed that around 3 a.m. on May 30, Stephany entered the premises and joined a young man in light-colored clothing. Their interaction during the tournament appeared casual, and around 5 a.m., they left the hall together. The hotel staff remembered this stranger, noting his politeness and friendliness. One employee even compared his appearance to Brad Pitt. This was what stood out most in their memory. Further examination of surveillance footage showed that at 5:16 a.m., the pair entered room 309. After some time, the young man left and returned with coffee and pastries for 2. Approximately 3 hours and 20 minutes after their first entry into the room, he left the premises with his backpack, telling the staff not to disturb the girl. When concerned detectives entered the room, they were met with a horrific scene. Stephany Flores was found dead, brutally beaten. According to investigators, the murder weapon was a tennis racket recovered from the crime scene. The medical examination revealed numerous injuries: a broken neck, hemorrhage in the left part of the head, nasal damage, signs of strangulation, blunt trauma to the back of the head and lower neck. The immediate cause of death was brain hemorrhage from blunt force trauma. Stephany's body was fully clothed, lying on her back, and showed no signs of sexual assault. However, all her money, about $15,000, $10,000 in winnings and $5,000 from her father for purchasing a laptop, cards, and valuables were stolen. The investigation quickly identified the suspect, 22-year-old Dutch citizen Joran van der Sloot, under whose name room 309 was registered. Further investigation revealed that he was internationally wanted and connected to another complex criminal case. While investigating Stephany Flores's case, detectives discovered a chilling coincidence: Joran van der Sloot had already been a suspect in the disappearance of American Natalee Holloway. This event occurred on the island of Aruba exactly 5 years earlier, on May 30, 2005. This disturbing discovery prompted law enforcement to act as quickly as possible, fearing that the dangerous criminal might be involved in other crimes. While the search for the European fugitive continued, investigators delved into Natalee Holloway's case to better understand the suspect. Natalee's story began in Clinton, Mississippi, where she was born on October 21, 1986. The eldest child in the family, she experienced her parents' divorce at age 7, staying with her mother but maintaining warm relations with her father. The family's life changed when Natalee's mother remarried a successful businessman, and they moved to Mountain Brook, Alabama. Natalee was 14 at the time. Natalee was an exemplary student, passionate about cheerleading and dancing, graduating with honors. Her achievements earned her a full university scholarship, and the future seemed bright until a fateful trip derailed all plans. In May 2005, 18-year-old Natalee traveled with a school group for a dream vacation to the island of Aruba, part of the Dutch Caribbean, known for its safety and low crime rate. The trip was organized for graduates. A total of 124 students under the supervision of 11 teachers stayed at the Holiday Inn on an all-inclusive basis. On the island, where consumption is permitted from age 18, the vacation proceeded carefree. Each day followed a similar routine: flexible wake-up time, beach relaxation, swimming in the crystal-clear Caribbean waters, afternoon rest, dinner, and entertainment at the casino bar with cocktails. On May 29, 2005, the last day of vacation, everything followed the usual pattern. Natalee, like others, packed her belongings, placed her passport near her suitcase, and went to dinner. Dramatic events unfolded the next morning when the group gathered in the hotel lobby for departure to the airport. Natalee's absence was initially attributed to oversleeping, but calls to her room went unanswered. When teachers and staff opened her room, they found only packed belongings and her passport. Urgent searches throughout the hotel premises yielded no results. Around 11 a.m., a teacher contacted Natalee's mother to report the disappearance. The mother categorically rejected suggestions of her daughter's voluntary departure, expressing fears of kidnapping. The shocked group, knowing Natalee's responsible nature, understood something serious had happened. After notifying the police, most students and teachers returned home, while the girl's parents, mother with stepfather and biological father, urgently flew to Aruba. They immediately launched their own search, distributing photos of their daughter and actively cooperating with the investigation. The mother also reported the incident to 911 and the FBI. The investigation established that Natalee hadn't returned to her room on the last night. According to friends' testimonies, she was seen in the hotel casino, communicating with a tall young man of European appearance, presumably Dutch. Security guards confirmed that after the casino closed, the girl got into a Honda with 3 young men whom the establishment staff knew as regular visitors. The investigation identified the 3 young men from the Honda: 17-year-old Dutch national Joran van der Sloot and the Kalpo brothers, 21-year-old Deepak and 18-year-old Satish. Surveillance cameras confirmed the security guard's testimony that Natalee spent time at the same table with Joran before leaving the establishment with this trio. Casino staff characterized Joran as an experienced manipulator who regularly visited the establishment seeking wealthy female tourists, trying to extort money from them. Despite his young age, just 18, and coming from a respectable family, his father was a lawyer preparing to become a judge, the young man already had a problematic reputation. A former honor student athlete who was predicted to have a brilliant football career, in his teens he became a regular at bars and casinos, abusing alcohol. The investigation focused on Joran. When police arrived with Natalee's parents at his house, where the familiar Honda was parked, the suspect's father reported that his son had gone to another hotel's casino. However, he wasn't found there. Later, Joran's father called the police, reporting his son's return with friend Deepak. During separate interrogations, the friends' versions not only differed but constantly changed. Initially, they denied any acquaintance with Natalee, but after being shown video recordings, Joran remembered the meeting. According to him, after the casino, the four of them went to a nightclub where they danced and drank, after which they allegedly drove the girl back to the hotel. Later, he added a detail about harassment by a hotel security guard, but the police, having camera footage, knew Natalee hadn't returned to the hotel. Throughout the investigation, the suspects were repeatedly detained for false testimony but were released each time due to lack of evidence. Their version of events changed again. Now they told of a trip to the lighthouse to watch the ocean and a walk on Ayrshire Beach. According to Joran, the Kalpoe brothers left, leaving them alone. He claimed that Natalee was heavily intoxicated, constantly passing out, and he left her alone on the beach since he had to wake up early for classes. According to his version, they only kissed, without contact. The Kalpoe brothers instead claimed that the Dutchman simply had fun with the girl and abandoned her on the beach. A thorough beach search yielded no results. A new version was proposed by a gardener from another hotel who claimed to have seen all three suspects digging a hole near a pond on the night of the disappearance. Police drained the pond and dug up the area but found nothing. Time passed, but the case didn't progress. The Holloway family, dissatisfied with the investigation's progress, accused the police of incompetence and insufficient pressure on Joran. They announced a reward, $100,000 for information about Natalee's whereabouts and $1 million for her return alive. This led to a flood of unverified reports, which, according to police, only hindered the investigation. Tension between Aruban authorities and the Holloway family grew. Law enforcement felt they were under excessive pressure to arrest suspects without sufficient evidence. Although Joran, Deepak, and Satish spent 3 weeks in custody, Joran, an additional 2 months, they were never charged. The case took a new turn when the Kalpoe brothers accused Joran's father of helping his son conceal the body. Despite a 3-day detention, no evidence against him was found. Using his legal knowledge, Joran's father successfully sued the Aruban police for wrongful detention, receiving compensation of $40,000. The case of Natalee's disappearance gained widespread attention in American media, causing serious concern for Aruban authorities, whose economy largely depended on U.S. tourists. The girl's parents tirelessly fought for justice, trying to intensify the investigation. Joran van der Sloot, instead of keeping a low profile, began actively appearing on American television programs, giving paid interviews where he discussed his meeting with Natalee and the events of that night. He persistently maintained his innocence in the girl's disappearance. A year after the incident, Joran returned to the Netherlands to continue his studies. On local television programs, he presented himself as a victim of conspiracy, repeating his version about leaving Natalee in the hotel lobby and on the beach. 2 years after the girl's disappearance, he even co-authored a book with a journalist, detailing his version of events, turning the tragedy into a source of profit. Under pressure from the Holloway family, police conducted a thorough search of Joran's house and surrounding area in Aruba, digging up the entire yard, but to no avail. The investigation was closely followed in the USA, Aruba, and the Netherlands, and Joran himself became a controversial media figure. The public was divided between those who believed in his innocence and those who considered him guilty. During one television show, he even lost his temper and threw a glass at a journalist. 3 years later, a new witness emerged claiming to have seen Joran with his father near a fast food establishment at 4 a.m. on the night of the disappearance. According to him, the young man was running from the establishment, and then 2 men drove away in a red Jeep. Additional suspicions were raised by Joran's ex-girlfriend's statement about his chilling remark regarding his ability to dispose of a body. However, even these new testimonies didn't lead to charges. In 2008, the situation escalated after the emergence of a recording made by a hidden camera by a Dutch journalist. In it, Joran described Natalee's death, claiming she suddenly lost consciousness on the beach, after which his friends helped dispose of the body in the sea. In another recording, he gloated about the body never being found. Aruban police didn't consider these confessions sufficient evidence, viewing them as attempts to attract attention and make money. After this, Joran voluntarily underwent treatment in a psychiatric clinic, then moved to Bangkok, where he opened a restaurant with money earned from media activities. In Thailand, he gave another scandalous interview where he made shocking statements about human trafficking, which he later claimed were jokes. These statements attracted local police attention, forcing him to urgently leave the country and sell his business. Soon after these events, Joran's father died, causing him to have a nervous breakdown and another course of treatment in a psychiatric hospital. Finding himself in financial difficulties after leaving the hospital, he developed a new money-making scheme. In 2019, he anonymously contacted the Holloway family's lawyer, proposing a deal. The story began with a shocking proposal. The young man offered to reveal the location of Natalee Holloway's remains for $250,000. He demanded an advance payment of $25,000, which the missing girl's father agreed to provide. The investigation established that the author of these messages was a man named Joran. The meeting took place on Aruba, where Joran told Natalee's father a new version of events. According to him, he accidentally pushed the girl who was asking to be let go. When he did, she fell and hit her head on a rock, resulting in instant death. After this, according to Joran, he and his father buried the body in a house foundation. However, police investigation quickly exposed the lie. The indicated house had been built before Natalee's disappearance, making it impossible to conceal a body there. Shortly after the meeting, the father received an email from Joran confessing that he had fabricated the entire story. Natalee's parents didn't give up and cooperated with the FBI, gathering evidence against the Dutchman at least for fraud and extortion. When the case was finally opened, Joran fled to Peru, where his life unexpectedly intersected with Stephany Flores's fate. The resolution came on June 3, 2010, when Joran's ex-girlfriend called the police. He had contacted her asking to borrow money for a ticket, but instead of helping, she informed law enforcement of his whereabouts. The fugitive was arrested in Chile, where he had arrived by 2 taxis from Peru, attempting to purchase an airline ticket. Police immediately noticed blood on his clothes. He was in such a hurry that he hadn't even changed. After extradition to Peru, Joran was charged with Stephany Flores's murder. Initially, he maintained his innocence, telling a story about armed robbers who allegedly broke into the hotel room, stole valuables, and shot the girl. According to his version, the blood on his clothes appeared as a result of the shooting. However, evidence disproved this story. Surveillance cameras didn't record any robbers, no one heard gunshots, and most importantly, the girl had no gunshot wounds. For days after his arrest, Joran confessed to the murder. According to him, the tragedy occurred after Stephany found information about the Natalee Holloway case on his laptop. When he tried to explain to her that he wasn't involved in Natalee's disappearance, the frightened girl hit him and tried to escape. This triggered his rage. He struck her with his elbow in the nose and began strangling her. Seeing blood on his shirt, he took it off and used it to cover the victim's face. Joran stopped the attack only when Stephany showed no signs of life. He explained his actions as influenced by alcohol and fear that the girl would go to the police. According to him, it was an impulsive act caused by loss of self-control. However, investigators leaned toward a simpler motive: robbery to obtain money and valuables. Realizing he faced lengthy imprisonment in Peru, Joran tried to negotiate with investigators. He offered to reveal the location of Natalee Holloway's remains in exchange for dropping all charges, but this offer was rejected. The trial proceeded quickly as the evidence was irrefutable. Cameras recorded him entering the room with Stephany and leaving alone. Her blood was found on his wrists, and his DNA was found on the victim's body and the murder weapon. On his lawyer's advice, who promised a maximum of 15 years imprisonment, Joran pleaded guilty. However, the court sentenced him to 28 years in prison and ordered him to pay the Flores family compensation of $75,000. The convict was dissatisfied with the sentence and blamed everything on his lawyer and the police, claiming he was forced to confess. It was also decided that after serving his sentence in Peru, Joran would be extradited to the U.S. to face charges of fraud and extortion regarding the Holloway family. In 2014, while in prison, Joran met a 33-year-old Peruvian accountant Lady Figueroa, who sold sweets and cigarettes to inmates. They developed a romance that led to marriage. The couple later had a daughter whom they named Trudy van der Sloot after Joran's grandmother. Thanks to the liberal rules of the penitentiary, his wife was able to visit Joran twice a week. In her accounts, she portrayed him as an extremely kind person. However, their relationship ended unexpectedly. In 2020, Joran decided to divorce her for a younger woman, 24-year-old Eva, with whom, as it later turned out, he was involved in smuggling contraband into prison. This led to additional punishment, 7 years of imprisonment and transfer to a stricter facility where visits were prohibited. Since then, he maintained contact with the outside world through correspondence with Eva and other women. For many years, Joran faced no official charges in Natalee Holloway's disappearance, which remained unsolved. However, the deceased's family was convinced of his involvement. According to witnesses, Joran and the Kalpoe brothers were known for their scheme of targeting wealthy American tourists. Joran, thanks to his fluent English and attractive appearance, acted as the main operative, while the brothers played supporting roles. Natalee's relatives suspected she fell victim to such a fraud scheme. Perhaps the initial plan didn't involve murder, they just wanted to swindle money. But something went wrong, possibly, the girl refused to give up her money, leading to a fatal argument. According to one theory, the criminals disposed of the body by throwing it into the ocean where sharks live. The theory of premeditated murder wasn't ruled out either, especially after learning about the murder of Stephany Flores, who, like Natalee, met Joran in a casino. Initially, Peruvian authorities planned to extradite Joran to the U.S. only after he served his sentence for Stephany Flores's murder. However, in May 2023, the decision changed. They agreed to temporarily transfer him to American authorities, considering the advanced age of prosecution witnesses. Authorities hoped this would bring peace to the Holloway family. Despite Joran's attempts through his lawyer to cancel the extradition, at the end of May 2023, he was urgently removed from the Peruvian prison. In early June, FBI agents delivered him to the U.S. by special aircraft. On June 8, 2023, Joran was brought to prison in Birmingham, near Natalee Holloway's hometown. Then on October 12, 2023, he pleaded guilty to fraud and extortion against Beth Holloway, Natalee's mother. As part of a plea agreement, he finally revealed the truth about Natalee's fate, confessing that he hit her with a brick on the beach after she rejected his advances, then disposed of her body in the ocean. During the court hearing, he publicly apologized to the Holloway family. On October 18, 2023, a federal judge in Birmingham sentenced him to 20 years in prison for extortion and fraud. He will serve this term after completing his 28-year imprisonment in Peru for Stephany Flores's murder. The Kalpoe brothers, Deepak and Satish, although accomplices on the night of Natalee's disappearance, went unpunished due to lack of evidence. After Joran's confession, the judge officially declared Natalee Holloway deceased. Although her body was never found, this confession put an end to the almost 20-year case of her disappearance. Currently, Joran is serving his sentence in Calapalca prison in Peru, after which he will be transferred to a federal prison in the U.S. to serve an additional 20-year term. Life often presents unexpected surprises, especially when it comes to creating a family. Many consider family the main purpose of their existence, yet finding a true life companion, someone who will become a reliable support, an ideal partner, and a caring parent, proves to be an extraordinarily difficult task. Blinded by feelings, people sometimes fail to notice warning signs, and fate may bring them together with someone who, instead of dreamed of happiness, will bring real suffering. This is exactly what happened to Janet Abaroa, a young woman who lived with her husband and newborn son in North Carolina. At 25, she had already endured many trials but hadn't given up hope of creating a strong family and becoming an exemplary mother to her child. Janet's life journey began on June 19, 1979, in a small town in Virginia. She was born into a large Mormon family, becoming the seventh of 10 children. Religious beliefs were deeply rooted in their family's daily life, shaping the worldview of each family member from childhood. From an early age, Janet stood out for her independence and inner strength while remaining a friendly girl with a sharp mind. Her special characteristic was a genuine love for children and dream of motherhood. Learning came easily to her, allowing her to devote much time to sports. In high school, she actively participated in soccer, basketball, and swimming, later continuing her athletic career at Southern Virginia University. The fateful meeting occurred in 1998 during one of the college matches, where Janet met young soccer player Raven Abaroa, who played for the university's men's team. Feelings immediately sparked between the young people, developing into a romantic relationship. Despite her sociable nature, Janet strictly adhered to religious principles and maintained certain boundaries in relationships. Their romance lasted 2 years before Raven proposed to his beloved. At that time, she had just turned 20, and her chosen one was a year younger. The wedding took place in August 2000 at the Mormon Temple in Washington, D.C. After marriage, the newlyweds began building their life together. Finding employment to achieve financial stability became their primary task. They found jobs as salespeople at a sporting goods store in Durham, North Carolina, where they had to relocate. The couple settled in a rented house in the suburbs and began their new life. At first glance, their marriage seemed happy. Those around them, friends and neighbors, considered them an ideal couple. However, serious problems lurked behind the attractive facade. Soon, Janet began sharing with relatives and friends her concerns about Raven's infidelities. Once, he even left home for several days, though he later returned. This situation was particularly difficult for Janet, as she cherished dreams of a large, strong family and children. Faithfulness wasn't just an empty word to her but a fundamental value. She found herself facing a difficult choice, still loving her husband and not wanting to destroy the marriage. The situation became more complicated when, shortly after discovering the infidelities, Janet learned about her pregnancy. On one hand, this was the fulfillment of her long-held dream, on the other, due to her husband's unreliable behavior, it became a source of anxiety and fear. The young woman feared the prospect of single motherhood and didn't know how to cope with Raven's unfaithfulness. The situation worsened due to the lack of a wide social circle. Being far from family, she felt lonely in her marriage. Only during pregnancy did Janet manage to find emotional support, becoming close with neighbors who became her friends. Janet's life began to improve thanks to her new friends. They were concerned about her situation and even tried to influence her husband Raven, attempting to convince him to stop his infidelities, especially considering his wife's pregnancy. Raven seemingly listened to their advice and promised to change, although it was difficult to trust the words of someone who had already deceived multiple times. The family situation indeed improved after the birth of their firstborn. On October 17, 2004, a boy was born whom they named Caden. Motherhood completely captivated Janet, all her thoughts and concerns now revolved around the baby, as she strived to become the best mother for her son. However, the young family found themselves in a difficult financial situation. Because Janet was on maternity leave and couldn't work, Raven's salary as a salesman remained their only source of income. However, his earnings were clearly insufficient to support a family of 3. Fortunately, their landlord was understanding of their situation and granted them a 3-month grace period on rent payments. He understood that having a baby required additional expenses, and the Abaroa family's financial situation was difficult. Despite this support, it didn't solve their financial problems. The couple was forced to seek help from the local church community, which responded by providing them with financial assistance. December 2004 brought new trials. When Caden was only 2 months old, his father was arrested for theft at the sporting goods store where the couple had previously worked. It was discovered that Raven had stolen several tracksuits and sold them online, causing damages exceeding $9,000. After this incident, both lost their jobs. Raven was fired for theft, and Janet left on her own, unable to bear the shame. Although Raven managed to avoid prison time, he was sentenced to 2 years of probation and ordered to pay the store compensation of $10,000. The situation became critical. The young parents were left without work and money, with an infant to care for. The criminal record significantly complicated Raven's search for new employment. Despite this, the family tried to survive by taking any temporary jobs and accepting help from loved ones. However, the worst was yet to come. On April 26, 2005, after Janet picked up her son from daycare, they returned home to prepare for dinner. That evening, Raven had dinner with the family, and when his wife and son fell asleep, he left for Morrisville for an indoor soccer match. Upon returning home, he witnessed a horrific scene. Janet was lying on the floor in a pool of blood, showing no signs of life. Nearby in his crib, little Caden was crying, fortunately unharmed. In shock, Raven immediately called 911, reporting that his wife had been attacked. He assumed she had been shot since she was covered in blood, and he couldn't understand exactly what had happened. Arriving at the scene, paramedics discovered that Janet's cause of death was multiple stab wounds, one of which, fatal, was to her neck. The crime scene in the rented house in Durham was horrific. The woman had lost almost a third of her blood. The tragedy was twofold. Along with Janet, her unborn child also died, as she was pregnant again. The brutality of the crime shocked the police officers who began the investigation. They had no idea that the search for the killer would stretch for almost a decade. The forensic examination of Janet's body revealed 3 deep stab wounds. A characteristic defensive wound was found on her left arm, indicating that the woman had tried to protect herself from the attacker. Another strike hit her chest, but the fatal blow was to the neck. The perpetrator severed an artery, causing massive bleeding. Janet was only 25 years old at the time of her death. The bleeding was so severe that the victim lost consciousness within seconds, and death occurred within minutes. Despite the relatively small number of stab wounds, experts were unable to determine the sequence in which they were inflicted. Determining the exact time of death also posed challenges for the medical examiners. Although decomposition processes had begun in the body, the low temperature in the room could have slowed them down. Because of this, the experts could only determine an approximate time window when the murder occurred. Crime scene investigators collected substantial evidence both at the crime scene and on the victim's body, but all of it required thorough examination. Simultaneously, the police conducted a search for witnesses who might point to a possible perpetrator. Naturally, the first suspect was the deceased's husband, Raven Abaroa. He was called in for questioning multiple times, during which they were able to reconstruct the chronology of events on that fatal day. According to Raven's testimony, on April 26, 2005, he was with his wife until 7 p.m., after which he drove to Morrisville for an indoor soccer match. Upon returning home at 10:40 p.m., he called out to Janet but received no response. Going upstairs, he found his wife kneeling in an unusual position. Raven explained that Janet often assumed this position to relieve menstrual pain, on her knees with her head touching the floor. When she didn't react to his presence, he turned on the light and saw the floor covered in blood. Upon turning his wife over, he realized she was dead. Given Raven's prolonged absence from home, it was difficult to precisely establish the time of murder and duration of bleeding. The medical examiners noted that due to the specific position of the body, blood could have been flowing for several hours due to the forward tilt until it coagulated. However, considering the nature of the wounds and the severed artery, there was also a possibility that the murder occurred immediately before Raven's return. When police asked the husband to share his theories about the possible perpetrator, he presented an unexpected version. According to him, the family had been experiencing serious financial difficulties lately. Raven suggested that Janet might have taken her own life, as she had been acting strangely shortly before her death and often spoke about her guilt, connecting their problems to Christian sins. Janet's relatives and close friends categorically disagreed with this theory. They were among the few people with whom she openly communicated and shared her concerns, and they had never heard such thoughts from her. Moreover, being a deeply religious person, Janet couldn't even consider the possibility of suicide. Detectives also rejected the theory, as the nature of the wounds indicated that the woman could not have inflicted them herself. Additionally, evidence of another person's presence was found at the crime scene, a bloody footprint and a fingerprint. The investigators were particularly intrigued by the fact that there were no signs of forced entry on the doors and windows. This meant that either the victim had let the killer in, or they had access to the house. In either case, it had to be someone from her close circle. The absence of obvious signs of struggle, except for the defensive wound on her arm, indicated a sudden attack. This was confirmed by Raven's statement that Janet had been sleeping before his departure. Only Raven's laptop and several kitchen knives disappeared from the house, one of which likely became the murder weapon. The perpetrator didn't take any valuables. Janet's jewelry and other precious items remained untouched. This immediately ruled out robbery as a motive. Although there was no direct evidence against Raven at that time, his subsequent behavior raised suspicions among investigators. The very next day after the murder, he took his son and moved to Utah. While this could be explained by a desire to leave the house where the tragedy occurred and the need for family support in Utah, Janet's relatives and friends who communicated with him after the murder noted his unusual behavior, which didn't match the state of someone who had lost a loved one. He seemed unconcerned about his wife's fate or finding the killer. Raven didn't participate in distributing reward notices or other activities organized by the police and the deceased's loved ones. He simply left with the child and had no plans to return. Investigators also noticed that from the very beginning of the investigation, Raven was reluctant to cooperate with the police, and later began ignoring their requests altogether. Meanwhile, Janet's family worked tirelessly to solve the crime, and soon the first serious lead emerged. The police discovered a possible motive when they learned about a $500,000 life insurance policy on Janet, taken out by Raven shortly before the murder, after she became pregnant for the second time. This raised suspicions, as the family had serious financial problems and had never had such insurance before. What appeared particularly suspicious was that despite lacking funds for basic necessities, Raven found money for insurance premiums. Moreover, he filed for the insurance payout immediately after the attack, even before Janet's funeral. All these circumstances made the widower the primary suspect in the case. Investigation into Raven's background revealed an uncomfortable truth to detectives: his relationship with Janet had been built on deception from the very beginning. He had portrayed himself as a devoted follower of the Mormon Church, fabricating stories about missionary work in Peru. Although this lie couldn't directly prove his involvement in the crime, it spoke volumes about his character. After the tragic events, Raven settled in Salt Lake City, Utah. There, he led a relatively peaceful life, having received the insurance payout and raising his child. It was in this city where fate brought him together with Vanessa Pont, a kindergarten teacher at the daycare where he enrolled his son. Their acquaintance quickly developed into a romantic relationship, facilitated by frequent meetings and shared interests. At that time, Vanessa had been raising her own child alone for 5 years. Disappointed in her personal life, she had resigned herself to the idea of being single and planned to dedicate herself to raising her child. However, Raven stood out from other men with his friendliness and persistence. He skillfully attracted her attention, though even here he resorted to deception. In his stories to his new girlfriend, he presented a version where his wife had died in a car accident. Raven had no idea that Janet's family was closely monitoring his every move, considering his behavior extremely suspicious. The deceased's relatives and friends hoped to gather evidence of his involvement in the murder by observing his subsequent actions. Janet's close ones quickly discovered that he was spreading a false version about his former wife's death. To most acquaintances, he told the story of a fatal car accident. Initially, Vanessa trusted Raven unconditionally, not delving into the details of his former wife's fate. However, her natural curiosity eventually took over, and she independently discovered information that Janet had been the victim of an unsolved murder, dying from 3 stab wounds. Nevertheless, Raven managed to convince the trusting Vanessa of his innocence. He constantly complained about unfair treatment from the police and public, who, according to him, groundlessly accused him of his child's mother's death. He insisted that the real killer was a burglar. Surprisingly, this version seemed convincing to Vanessa. Upon learning about Raven's new relationship, Janet's family tried to warn Vanessa, cautioning her about possible danger from him. However, the enchanted woman dismissed all warnings, completely trusting her chosen one. After 3 years of dating, the couple married. However, what initially seemed like an ideal union gradually took on threatening dimensions, reminiscent of Raven's previous marriage. The new wife also encountered his uncontrolled outbursts of anger and sudden mood swings. The situation escalated to physical violence, causing the woman to fear for her life. Their marriage, which had begun so rapidly, lasted only 4 months. Feeling constant pressure from the investigation, Raven decided to make a public statement through the press. He expressed hope for a quick resolution of the case and identification of the real killer, which would clear him of all suspicions, while continuing to insist on his innocence. At this time, a new detective took charge of the investigation, firmly determined to see the case through to the end and ensure just punishment for the young mother's killer. The investigation gained new momentum thanks to active cooperation between the deceased's family and investigators. During this time, Vanessa, Raven's former wife, increasingly contemplated the possibility that her ex-husband might have been involved in his first wife's murder. Her suspicions grew into firm conviction, he was capable of such brutality. Deciding to share her observations, Vanessa approached the media. In her testimony, she described her ex-husband's erratic behavior. As their relationship progressed, she became increasingly convinced of his violent aggression and capacity for violence, although he rarely used physical force. However, he constantly teetered on the edge of losing control. A particularly revealing incident occurred on Christmas 2018. During another argument provoked by Raven himself, he locked Vanessa in the bathroom. There, he made threats, spoke about his desire to harm her, his hatred for her, and his indifference to her possible death. This event became a turning point in their relationship and led to divorce. Vanessa admitted that she felt genuine fear of Raven, believing he could dispose of her just as he had likely done with his first wife. The new team of detectives enthusiastically took on the case, reconstructing the chronology of events that led to the tragedy. Although they were convinced of Raven's guilt, there was a serious obstacle: his alibi. On the evening of the murder, at the time of the attack on Janet, several witnesses saw him at the stadium where he was playing indoor soccer. Further complicating the case was the fact that the footprint found at the crime scene didn't match the suspect's shoes, and the bloody fingerprint on the door also didn't belong to him. However, his behavior continued to raise suspicions. Detectives carefully analyzed the recording of his conversation with the emergency dispatcher. One of the most notable inconsistencies was that Raven described the obvious stab wounds as gunshot wounds. Although this wasn't enough for an accusation, he wasn't a forensic expert and was in shock. The police believed that a clever and intelligent suspect might intentionally feign incompetence. During a follow-up phone interview, Raven stuck to his version of events, but his inability to recall important details heightened suspicions, especially when he began accusing the police of incompetence. He talked about several knives disappearing from his house on the night of the attack, one of which he allegedly found later during the move. In his opinion, the police hadn't found this knife due to carelessness, and he expressed doubts about their ability to solve the crime at all. Detectives were confident in the thoroughness of their crime scene examination, although over years of unsuccessful investigation, many pieces of evidence had lost their original value. Nevertheless, circumstantial evidence pointed to Raven. Interviews with his former girlfriends confirmed the suspect's tendency toward aggression and violence, which regularly led to the breakdown of his relationships. The investigation revealed an important detail: on the evening of the attack, Raven behaved unusually with his dog, locking it in the garage, something he had never done before and couldn't explain. Investigators saw logic in this. The suspect might have feared that the dog would defend Janet or attract neighbors' attention by barking during the crime. Additional suspicions were raised by the fact that prior to the tragedy, Raven had transferred information from his laptop to another storage device. Considering that the laptop was allegedly stolen later, this appeared to be advanced preparation for the crime. Based on accumulated circumstantial evidence, on February 1, 2010, he was arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder and extradited to North Carolina. However, direct evidence was lacking for a convincing prosecution. Detectives continued their thorough analysis of case materials, including crime scene photographs. A new investigator noticed an important detail: an open empty contact lens case on the bedside table. This raised questions since Janet's parents maintained that she never slept with her contacts in and always removed them before bed. However, according to Raven's version, when he left for soccer, his wife was already asleep with their child. This inconsistency could indicate that the murder occurred before Janet was preparing to go to bed, and before Raven's departure. Unfortunately, during the initial autopsy, the presence of contact lenses wasn't checked. Such a detail often seems insignificant for investigation, but in this case could become key evidence of the suspect's false testimony. To verify this version, a decision was made to exhume the body, which Janet's family agreed to, seeking to establish the truth. In July 2010, during a re-examination, forensic experts found fragments resembling contact lens remains in the deceased's eyes. Despite the material's drying and deformation, the examination confirmed this assumption. For convincing evidence in court, a year-long experiment was conducted using pig eyes with contact lenses that underwent embalming procedures identical to those used in human burials. The experiment confirmed that Janet was indeed wearing contact lenses at the time of death, and therefore wasn't preparing to sleep, which exposed the main suspect's false testimony. Raven's trial began in 2013, drawing significant public and media attention. Dozens of people sought to be present in the courtroom to hear the stunning details of the case. Before the hearings began, the prosecution confidently declared conviction in the suspect's guilt. The prosecution relied mainly on circumstantial evidence, which played in favor of Raven's defense. However, the volume of collected materials was so substantial that it should convincingly prove the defendant's guilt. According to close ones and friends, a month before her death, Janet had complained about serious problems with her husband, especially his uncontrollable outbursts of anger. She repeatedly expressed fear of him and intended to leave. Janet's mother confirmed frequent heated arguments between the couple, although she had never witnessed physical violence. In conversations with the police, Raven acknowledged the conflicts but categorically denied involvement in the murder. The defense at trial emphasized the investigation's bias, which focused exclusively on proving the husband's guilt while ignoring other versions and important evidence: an unknown person's fingerprint in the living room cabinet, a blood stain on the front door that belonged neither to the victim nor her husband, and a footprint near the body. The prosecution built their strategy on evidence that the defendant was a manipulator with violent tendencies and sharp mood swings. The deceased's friends suggested he had mental disorders. Raven's former lover spoke about his excessive caution. He even used a separate SIM card for communicating with other women, which could indicate his ability to carefully plan his actions and mislead the investigation. This same woman shared a disturbing episode when Raven forced her into intimate relations in a car on the roadside. Due to his aggressive behavior, she was forced to submit and even left a strand of her hair in the car, in case something happened to her. Such an action indicated a real fear for her life, which she frankly expressed before the jury. The prosecutor considered Janet's unplanned pregnancy as one of the possible motives for murder. She had only told her closest people about her condition, including her sisters. Despite joy about future motherhood, she doubted her husband's parenting qualities and feared his reaction, especially considering their financial difficulties. The prosecution suggested that news about the upcoming addition to the family might have provoked Raven to commit the brutal act. During the investigation, another falsehood emerged in the testimony of the defendant, who continued to insist that he had found his wife already dead. During the investigation, a striking contrast emerged in Raven's testimonies. While he told police he had found his wife already dead, in confession at the local church he admitted that Janet was still alive, trying to talk to him, but quickly lost consciousness and died. The investigation also uncovered signs that the victim might have been planning to escape from her husband. She had resumed communication with her former boyfriend Scott, although the correspondence indicated only the beginning of renewed contact, without signs of an intimate relationship. Due to these new circumstances, the defense filed a motion for mistrial, arguing that the character of both the victim and the defendant hadn't been fully represented. The motion was granted, and the next phase of the trial was scheduled for March 2014. Before the new trial began, Raven accepted a plea deal with the prosecution, pleading guilty to the involuntary manslaughter of his wife. For this, he received a sentence of 10 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 8 years. He was credited with the 4 years he had already spent in jail awaiting verdict. Custody of his daughter was transferred to Janet's family. On Christmas 2017, at the age of 39, the killer was released. He returned to Utah, where he lives to this day. Such a lenient sentence deeply outraged the victim's family. They considered it unjust, as their Janet could never be brought back, while her killer got the chance to continue a normal life. Despite this, the relatives have to accept that at least this level of justice was achieved. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. Until next time, friends.